will take our first plenary, and it's going to be on shaping Africa's innovation frontiers, entrepreneurship, ecosystem, and governance. So without much ado, let me welcome our moderator, who happens to be from the Global Advocacy and Partnership Director, Bridges to Prosperity, Eniola Mafe Abaga. Is it the same Abaga we know? Huh? Am I? Ah. Oh my God, Joe. You're welcome. Take your seat.
I'll stand.
Okay. Do you want to call the rest of the panel? Or okay, please do. All right.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Okay, we can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Okay, that was a little better. Maybe we were partying a little bit too much yesterday. Yes, thank you. Good morning. I am Eniola Mafe Abaga. I am the Advocacy and Partnerships Director with Bridges to Prosperity, a technology-enabled nonprofit that builds bridges and infrastructure. And I think this is a very timely conversation we're having here. We had heard yesterday about the need for Nigeria and Africa to thrive. We have also heard that we're behind on the SDGs and many issues that we are dealing with across the continent. And we know that about 85% of the SDGs are not met. We also know that about 75% of those SDGs could be accelerated through technology and entrepreneurship and innovation. So where's the disconnect? We are at 2024. We have 6 years left. So this conversation is very timely for a number of reasons. We explore how multi-stakeholder collaboration can drive entrepreneurship that is needed across the continent. We know that entrepreneurs are dealing with so many challenges, both in physical infrastructure, but definitely in terms of technology and digital. And also innovation, economic development across the continent needs collaboration, needs partners, needs intent, needs us to put our egos aside and work together. And we also are going to dive into what's transformative. It's not going to be all sad, I promise. We're going to look at, yes, we're going to look at the challenges, but also the opportunities that our panelists represent who are actively doing this work right now. We need more scale up. We will touch on artificial intelligence, but there's other sessions that will cover that. But really, we want to look at the role that innovators have, especially African innovators have, to be able to contribute in the ways that we need for the continent and has dividends for our people. And also, the format today is a little bit different from what you've seen yesterday. Today, we will start with fire starter speeches from each of our esteemed panelists, followed by a bit of a deeper panel discussion. We'll cover, as I said, collaboration, AI, data, focus on actionable insights, so you can also keep us honest. If you're not hearing the actionable insights, just put your hand up, let us know, let us stay on track, but I know our panelists will. So to kick off, I have the esteemed honor of inviting Dr. Juliet Ehumian to the stage, both a significant part of NESG, former Google, and founder and head of Beyond Limits. Julia, I'm hoping that you can share with us some of your thoughts. I know we talked around what actually is needed for entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs and innovators across the continent. And I know we've spoken about it, so I'm really excited for you to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eniola. Good morning, everyone. Great to be, great to be here. And this is quite an exciting topic. So for a while now, we've been standing on the brink or the threshold of a transformative era in Africa. I think for too long, actually, because the region is ripe with possibilities. We have a huge population, 1.5 billion people, the youngest population in the world, 70% youth demographic that are creative, resilient, talented, entrepreneurial. But on the other hand, we have a number of challenges: infrastructure, unemployment, financing. One reality that offers comfort is the fact that we've demonstrated that we have the ability to leverage technology to transcend existing challenges. I'm talking specifically about the mobile revolution, where we went from near zero telecoms infrastructure to a situation where we're a dominant player in mobile telephony and leading innovation in mobile payments and fintech. I believe that we're in a similar situation and have the unique opportunity to lean into technology and the digital economy to accelerate growth. During the panel, the plenary yesterday, there were what seemed to be opposing views, but actually I think they're quite complementary. So on the one hand, Mavis was talking about the need for us to pick specific sectors to focus on and invest in. And Indamit from the World Bank was talking about the need for investment in digital infrastructure and tools and infrastructure that would support multiple sectors. I actually think we need both. And I think the sweet spot, the intersection point, is the digital economy. It represents a low-hanging fruit. And as we think about Africa's future, as we think about fueling innovation, nurturing entrepreneurship, I think the digital economy offers a lot of promise. And we're already seeing a lot of activity in this space. Now, when we talk about entrepreneurship, that's one thing that we don't lack in Africa. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. Out there, there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity. We have young Africans that are already doing a number of great things, using technology to solve local problems, some of them becoming unicorns. We have entrepreneurs that are leveraging digital platforms, like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc., to share talent and creative content and monetize that content. And a lot of that monetization exists from outside of the country and the region. So already through these platforms, we're diversifying the economy, we're exporting culture and talent, and transcending the barriers of security, access to capital, etc. So I think the digital economy offers immense potential for us in Africa as we look at fueling innovation. And we need to do three things to just really make sure that we're creating an environment where entrepreneurs have what they need to be able to identify the opportunities and tap into them. So one is capacity building, obviously, just making sure that there's access to cutting edge tools, critical thinking, ability to develop practical solutions to real problems. And then funding. Funding is critical. If you just look at our historical data, there is no year where we've reached $10 billion in funding as a region. Last year, funding to the region was around $4 billion. Now, compare that to funding in to UK startups at $23 billion, and that's a population of less than 70 million people. In the US, that number is about $200 million. Compare that to $4 billion. Compare that to $4 billion for a region that has 1.5 billion people. So there is a huge gap. And it's important that we look at diverse sources of funding to support our startups and help them to take their ideas into sustainable businesses. The third thing is just really creating an enabling environment by providing infrastructure, providing support, protection for intellectual property, supporting and creating an enabling environment for the growth of investments, infrastructure, and just really making sure that our entrepreneurs are supported in their entrepreneurial ventures. Now, the opportunity is significant. And if we really lean into these pillars with intentionality, we can really turn the tide. If all we do in the next decade in Africa is to tread the path of other emerging markets that have put the digital economy front and center, we will see that we have the possibility to increase GDP per capita on average across the region from $2,000, which is where it is right now, to about $10,000, which will translate into an average GDP for the continent of over $15 trillion in a decade. And so it is time for us to really put a lot of these ideas into action and create those pillars that can help us lean into and stimulate an active digital economy and participation in that economy so that we can successfully harness the talent that exists here to serve not just the region, but to create global solutions that also benefit and generate returns for the region. I'm looking forward to further conversations around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. If you just take a seat, we can have you here. Thank you. So I think one of the things is the numbers don't lie. We see a massive gap. I think I heard 1, capacity building, 2, investment, fill the investment gap to meet the needs of the entrepreneurs, and 3, infrastructure, 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 and invest in it intentionally. Thank you, Juliet. I think we'll cover, Dr. Juliet, we'll cover a couple of those pieces as we go along. I want to move next to Latanya Mapp, who's president and CEO of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Please give her a hand as she comes up. Latanya wants to focus around philanthropy, the wealth transfer and engagement, and how that can accelerate the drive to systemic change that we need across Africa. I'm very happy to have you to round out this fire starter piece. Thank you, Latanya.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure, and I thank NESG for the invitation to be with you this week. I thought I'd start, of course, with philanthropy because that's now where I'm ending. But as many of you, I come from the Generation X, and so unlike our parents that probably had one career throughout their lifetime, most of us have stretched across entrepreneurship, governance, and in the ecosystem, the larger ecosystem. And so I too, when I finished my doctorate degree in law, started a business in the United States where I was helping US businesses who actually wanted to invest in Africa. And that was my entrepreneurship stage. And then I went into governance and I joined the United Nations in humanitarian settings around the world. And actually, I was with USAID here in Abuja from 2006 to 2008 and served as mission director during my time in the diplomatic corps. And then I said, I loved it here, as many of you who knew me then knew, I went into then International Health Organization, an NGO, where our largest program was actually in Nigeria. And so you'll see the theme going on around Africa, but also from there went to the funding world. And some of you, of course, know BC Fayeme, your former First Lady of Ekiti State, who actually is one of the pioneers and inventors of feminist philanthropy, was a teacher for me as I went into funding. And now I run the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And for those of you that don't know, Rockefeller, or RPA, as it's often called, has about $1 billion in assets, of which $500 million a year is put into grants around the world. And this is where I wanted us to go from. I want to thank Henrietta, who's here, Bankole, and she also works with NESG as a volunteer. She runs the office here in Lagos. And you know, it was really brilliant of her to think about how do, when we talk about collaborating for economic opportunities and success, not just in Nigeria, but as they said yesterday, in Nigeria means Africa. then how do we do this together with this ecosystem? And now I'm gonna ask all of you, because I know Nigerians love money, so I'm going to ask all of you to do some math, because I'm going to talk about the wealth transfer. So when I talk about the wealth transfer, this is $84 trillion that will go from my generation, from the baby boomers to my generation X. So that's many of us out here. So $84 trillion in by the end of the next decade will now have transferred from generation to generation. It's the largest wealth transfer in history. And by the end of this decade, that will be $17 trillion that will move. Now, I just heard from our colleague yesterday at the bank that $1 trillion of that actually is the representation here in Nigeria, assuming, as he said, the economic policies stay their course. That is a huge amount of resources. Now, keep doing our math. So we're saying that $17 trillion by the end of this decade, $84 trillion by the next decade will have passed from one generation to the next. And why is this important? Well, from the philanthropy standpoint, about a little less than 15% of that will be used for what we've been calling charitable purposes. So charitable purposes, as we know, has some ups and downs, much of it meaning that we'll move agendas, usually from capital cities in the West, into the global majority and do the work there. But more and more, what you're seeing from this kind of philanthropy and the collaborations that we're talking about today, whether in digital inclusion, whether around health, education, the workforce development that's required among these bulging youth, that partnership is going to look actually quite different. So instead of the 2% that now goes into local solutions and charitable giving, we're talking about a new generation of investment in local solutions. And that kind of investment is very much the kind of collaboration that's going to be required to reach the agendas that you have set for yourself. Not just yesterday, but over the last 30 years that NESG has been doing this work. And so that is the kind of partnership that I hope that we can start to move towards when we're talking about philanthropy. So those kind of, resources, the $84 trillion means now that we have a partnership, we have an opportunity to be able to now adjust those resources to be able to actually follow planned agendas. Many of us have heard of the big sort of global programs that come into countries like Nigeria, and it takes a long time for us to get up and running. Well, if we reverse that and say that those agendas now that have been set in Nigeria are where those dollars are going to follow and invest. So we're talking about making, instead of charity of those $84 trillion and the 15% that will come to countries like Nigeria, and I'm not including, just so you know, the $20 billion a year in remittances that come from the Africa or the Nigerian diaspora into Nigeria. We're just talking about wealth transfer. But all in all, it's an enormous amount of money. And instead of charity, we're talking investment. We're talking social investment and social entrepreneurs to promote local solutions. And that is what I would like to have a conversation about on how we do that together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Latanya. Yes, take a seat.
Okay.
We can have you right next to Juliet.
Okay, sure.
I'm excited about this because usually we don't get this opportunity to have the heads of entities that are ecosystem builders, ecosystem facilitators in this space. So we'll carry on with the momentum there. We're hearing a lot around blended finance, the need for further collaboration in intentful ways. Also, collaboration. How does that work? I think we'll talk a little bit more about what's the mechanics of that, what's working, what's not working, to get us to realizing some of those significant numbers and addressing the gaps that you've both raised. And also that there's a toolbox. It's not just philanthropy, it's not just leaving the entrepreneurs to innovate, it's also commercial stakes, it's also looking at what is missing and facilitating the less commercial sides of building an ecosystem. So to round out our panel, we're going to move into a discussion with our panel. And I would like to call up to round this out Uche Mwambu. I'm so sorry, my pronunciation is so bad. Uche, I hope you can forgive me there. He is the interim director, country director for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, based in Abuja. Thank you very much. Please take a seat. So Uche, I'll have you kick it off because you've heard the numbers. Not to put Gates on the spot here, but I've heard that you're a significant player in this discussion. And maybe what I'll have is this part talking about what's working, what's not. You've laid out the landscape, Juliet and Latanya. Uche, I want to turn to you and let's I want to hear from you. Your work is at the forefront of advancing digital innovation, entrepreneurship, support in Africa, especially MSMEs, marginalized communities, the people we're doing this for in the end. So can you provide us with just a little bit more of a strategic overview for you? We've heard from Latanya and Dr. Juliet on how the foundation is building that ecosystem. If you can pay attention also to just that toolbox. I'm hearing we may know a lot of the philanthropy, but there's also different tools that you've used as well, and I'll bring our other panelists in on some of that as well.
Excellent. No, thank you, Eniola. It's really good to be here, and I just wanted to start by acknowledging the presentations of Juliet and Latanya. It's really, really good. A lot of the things you talked about, I think, are things that give us a lot of hope in the way we work at the Gates Foundation. So maybe let me address your question, Eniola, by first talking a little bit about the Gates Foundation in terms of what we do and how we do it, right? And the how will go into some of the discussions around ecosystem building that we do. So essentially, everything we do at the foundation, to your point, is really at the frontiers of trying to help people survive. We do a lot of that with our health work. But also, as people survive, we are very interested in putting them in charge of their futures by providing them with access to opportunities to achieve their full potential, right? So we call that our economic opportunity work. And for us, it really starts with investing in a set of public goods. And the way we define public goods are, they are potentially transformative solutions that are accessible to everybody free of charge in the world. So we put our philanthropic capital towards creating this. So it starts with, evidence-based insights. So this is where the toolbox comes to play. So there's a lot of money that we talked about flowing into Africa, but if that money we're not able to direct it to the solutions and evidence-based approaches to be able to make a difference, then we have a huge gap. So that's where the Gates Foundation starts from, right? And when we figure out those evidence-based approaches to do things right, we then turn into innovations that we need to fund to be able to drive those evidence-based approaches. We think about innovations in two ways, right? One is products. So what are the new solutions to be able to help a woman have better access to financial services, credits, savings, things like that, or to help, a better vaccine to be able to reach kids in a way, right? So we fund some of those products innovations. But then we also fund system innovations, right? So that's really all about how do you find new ways for those solutions to reach the people on the frontier that we care about. So that's essentially our toolbox, those two things. Now, while the foundation's resources are considerable, it pales in comparison to the demand that is out there, the need, right? So the third thing we do is after you funded these innovations, then you actually have to put together a set of partnerships that collectively can bring these innovations, right, to fruition, to help it get taken up in countries and taken to scale. So we spend a lot of time in partnerships that build that ecosystem. The partnerships take different forms. One of it is here today, actually. I'm proud to say we're active funders of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, right? So this is a platform that actually uses its convening power to be able to bring people together and talk about things. We just came back from the UN General Assembly where we had another type of that ecosystem. We call it our goalkeepers event. I think Julia started at the beginning with some statistics. Oh no, you started at the beginning with some statistics about the SDGs and how we're trying to drive towards it, right? So that's another event. And actually a lot of Nigerians end up attending that event where every year we take stock of where the world is in being able to get to those innovations and be able to get to those SDGs. And then we introduce, and every year is a different thematic one, we introduce innovations that are possible for us to be able to leapfrog. And the whole idea is saying, how do we use this to actually inspire people, governments, private sector, individuals to take those innovations in their own individual areas and try to drive them forward. So those are the, essentially the toolbox on which we operate. So now let me maybe give a few examples of some of the areas, like to bring this a little bit to more tangible means, right? So we spend a lot of time in Nigeria, particularly on women's economic empowerment. And this is driven by a belief that if you empower a woman, right, with the right tools, access to credit, access to savings, business models that are fit for purpose for them, then they actually have an ability to be able to transform the economy. So we spend time in doing a couple of things. One is really just, there's a program we have called SKY. It's a Pan-Africa program that is really focused on trying to help women and adults and girls just, understand the benefits of creating their own digital identities and bank accounts and creating a trail of those accounts, and how just doing that actually brings them front and center into the financial space. But we don't stop there. Beyond having an account, we also support programs that actually, help these same women understand and how to use some of these financial products safely, right? So for example, there's a program in Nigeria called Nigeria for Women program. What they do is they try to, club together a bunch of women and actually get them into savings groups so they can save together and be able to, and they get loans, right? They disburse loans to them, but it's a different kind of loan product where it's not just consumptive loans, right? It's teaching them how to use those loans to be able to convert that into income generating activities, right? So productive credit, so consumptive credit versus productive credit. So those are the type of things that we do in those areas, right? I'll pick another example. And I think you go to inclusive financial systems. We fund, the foundation provide capital, right? There's a catalyst fund that actually I think it's managed by Latania as part of one of the things they do, which is an investment initiative that is designed to provide early stage capital for fintech startups that are committed to focus on producing greater financial inclusion solutions. So that's a kind of financial mechanism we use. And there's a couple more, but we can comment.
And why was it early stage? What was so important about connecting at that early stage? Because there are points that Juliet had mentioned about the need for the capital to be at specific points of, I would call it maturation for the innovators, right? There's a timeliness of this. Yeah. So why early stage? What's important there?
Yeah. So I think for us, it's all about finding gaps, natural gaps in either the financing ecosystem or the product ecosystem where, so if you think about, the players in the ecosystem, there's private sector and there's government. Private sector will typically, invest or fund in solutions where they can get healthy returns, right? Guaranteed returns. So that leaves a lot of the sector out where, it's the startup sector where it's not profitable yet for private sector to be able to make it there. So that's a gap, that's a failure in the market. And if you think about governments will fund in things where the risk is low because they have to use the taxpayer money judiciously to be able to run their programs. So they won't invest in things where there's risk, right? So I think for us, again, trying to figure out where we play, we tend to do things where we see a market failure and where we can use our own philanthropic capital to be able to plug in. So in instances like that, early stage funding of fintechs is one of those places that fall through the cracks. So again, that's an area we decided to play for that reason.
Thank you. We'll do a quick. Hello? Yes, here we go. Thank you. Teamwork, collaboration. We're seeing that in practice. So I want to turn to Juliet because to reach those entrepreneurs, we need platforms that are focused on providing that kind of connection point to some of the conversations that both Latanya and Uche are talking about. The funding is coming in. We need to deal with the amount of that funding, but then connecting. Juliet, you have a platform that actually covers the different ecosystems that are needed. You talked about multi-sector approach and that collaboration multi-sector. Uche has kind of noted the public sector and the private sector. Particularly in terms of this conversation, can you share more about that relevance and why we need that connection point, those platforms to exist and to thrive on behalf of those innovators, if you wouldn't mind sharing? Sure. We're all testing it out. Let's do a quick test. Everybody. We're good. Thank you.
Thank you. So platforms to connect ecosystems are really crucial to aid and just create a fertile ground for collaboration. In my 25 plus years in the industry and leading a global multinational, Google, a lot of work around helping to build the digital ecosystem and working closely with startups. Some things that have become very clear. One is the fact that traditionally, when we think about activating ecosystems, we think about, so for example, in the case of the digital space, we think about, tech hubs and incubators where we take startups, bring them into an enabling environment where they have access to peer networks, they have access to infrastructure, internet connectivity, shared office space, possibly cloud store, perhaps subsidized cloud storage, cloud services and data storage, and if they're lucky, access to mentors. And that's good. That works to a certain extent. But if we want to fast track the growth of our startups and really drive innovation at scale, we need to go beyond this model and look at a deeper and broader sense of the ecosystem. So for example, ensuring that we're including business leaders who are potentially clients and investors in these startups, because that engagement and that exchange can really help to fuel innovative ideas and drive problem solving. Ensuring that we create engagements with VCs, private equity funds, angel investors, and non-equity grant providers, so that they can see firsthand what's incubating, and also so that the startups entrepreneurs get a good sense of what these investors are looking for and the opportunity areas and how to really tackle those. Because the reality is, we celebrate our unicorns across the continent, But in the last decade, Africa has produced just about 10 unicorns. And if you compare that with the UK, in the last decade, they've created 200 unicorns. So even though we celebrate our unicorns, for a continent of 1.5 billion people, we haven't started. And for every unicorn that we have today, so for every Flutterwave and every Andela, there are at least 100 other startups in that space that are doing great work, but they don't have the visibility. They don't have the access. They're not able to transcend their immediate environment and get the support that would really help them to move to the next level. And so creating these platforms where you can have this engagement can really bring them face to face with the opportunity that can transform their businesses. And also, a number of startups in Africa have been crippled by regulation. So it's important that policymakers are also brought into the ecosystem so that they can understand firsthand the realities within the sectors, the implications of policies, and also get a good sense of enabling policies that can stimulate growth. Now, these ecosystems cannot remain local. When we're talking about the digital economy, it transcends boundaries. So why are our ecosystems very siloed, right? We should be thinking about inter-ecosystem connections where we're connecting our ecosystems here with ecosystems around the world. There's no reason why a developer or an innovator sitting in Lagos cannot collaborate with someone in Singapore or Tel Aviv, right? And there's a lot of interest. When I travel, I find that there are a lot of investors, a lot of innovators that are interested in Africa, interested in making connections, but there's just no platform for them that they can trust, right, to help them engage. And of course, when you think about the narrative out there, which is not necessarily always complimentary or positive, then they're held back, but there's still a lot of interest, right? And so, these connections cannot happen organically. They have to be nurtured. We have to be deliberate in creating platforms that are trusted, that can bring people together and facilitate these connections. And that's the work that we're doing with DICE. So DICE is a platform, it's an acronym for Digital Innovation and Creative Excellence. And the objective of this platform is really that, to bring key players in the tech, business, and creative ecosystems together so that we can zoom into specific problems and challenges in different sectors, look at what's happening, the developments, the opportunities, the challenges, discuss, problem solving, facilitate collaborations, also globally with global immersions, ensure that we have multilateral organizations, we have other consulates and countries in the room to just really ensure that we have robust discussions that also persist beyond those gatherings. And so far, we've seen some great success stories. We've seen deals formed, great collaborations and partnerships, and local and international collaborations happen as a result of that platform. So these are very important to just really drive and accelerate our progress.
Thank you. I'm really struck by the fact that many times we have these panels and we talk just about the innovators themselves and this laundry list of things they have to do, especially in Africa. It's dealing with every single innovator in many ways is a social impact entity because of the nature of the operating environment they're in. They're oftentimes building or vertically integrating a number of things. And this is all before 8 o'clock to actually do the work that they're doing. So one of the things I wanted to just, with the audience here, if you can put up your hand, if you're an innovator, entrepreneur, and involved in a business that's related to tech, could you put your hand up? Hands up high. Thank you very much. Okay, we're seeing multi-generational entrepreneurs and innovators in the room. I love this. I want to turn to you, Latanya, and also Uche, as you can dive in here. Long laundry lists that Juliet had mentioned of what innovators have to deal with before 8 o'clock with their operating environment. what can we do to strengthen those innovation networks, right? So we know that there are things that are outside of the control of entrepreneurs. They have to do the work of innovation, right? They're competing from African entrepreneurs and competing for investment and also space and office space, everything from data issues to connectivity issues across Africa, while also turning up as a potential unicorn when we're seeing 200 unicorns in the same span of time in the UK as we have. So obviously, the work that I've seen many innovators in the room and online and beyond do to kind of get a small amount of the pie. What can we do to strengthen the networks that Juliet was talking about, the platforms, the throughput of investment to drive? What are we not doing? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to stop? Just a couple of questions. So I want to throw that to the
Just a couple of good questions.
to the group. Yeah. And you can dive in on this part as well.
Absolutely, and thank you again for that list, Juliet. It is, when we lift up and talk about financial inclusion, and we heard yesterday from many of the presenters talking about an economy where everyone is involved. This is really where we have to, and I think Uche mentioned philanthropy is a lot more riskier, where governments maybe can't be, and even private equity and venture capitalists will not go in. You can fill some of that gap with philanthropic dollars, and that is where the space is that I think that we can be the most helpful in these collaborations, right? To be able to hold some of that risk, to be able to insert resources into product development, into research and development, into digital technology. And this is where you're seeing it happen. And this is why I was talking about the transition in language from charity to actual investment into what's happening in country plans. And so, and I'll give a quick example, because for RPA, we work and collaborate with many, many players. Just recently, we, together with a number of governments, private sector companies, and of course, foundations, including Gates, Dangote, and others who are interested in eliminating lead poison from the blood of children and pregnant moms. Now, this seems like an issue that was gone, and in many parts of the West, lead poisoning is gone. But this is how we have to look, and identify things where there are gaps, where there are things going on that with just a little bit more input, we can make a change. And so USAID and other governments are actually making some steps to actually help with the system strengthening in countries to include actual testing, to include identification of lead poisoning, because as you know, the cognitive abilities of children goes down significantly. So trying to find that. So that identification is important. But once you identify that, then you actually need data and intelligence to be able to understand what you can do. And then in that piece of it, you need to say, do we have the right resources and the products out there? And we know that there are not. The testing, I think the cheapest testing equipment that we saw ran at something like $50,000 per unit. That's not accessible for many of the rural areas in most of the world, not just in Africa or Asia. But so then how do we actually engage innovators who we know exist, who we know are right there where the problems start? How do we engage them to start looking at new testing equipment? So it goes beyond the digital economy. It's right there on the ground. How do we make testing cheaper? How do we make sure now that testing is getting done everywhere? And so at RPA, what we're doing is trying to engage those innovators. There's a gap. Those innovators are out there, we know it, but for some reason, they're not bringing their ideas to market. So how do we get in there? And we encourage that kind of innovation, and then we bring that out. So then the venture capitalists and private equity can pick that up. So as Dr. Juliet was saying, there is this piece that has to be filled in order to get to these big, giant kind of innovations that need to happen on the continent. And philanthropy has to be there. So we have to identify, we have to use intelligence, and then we have to regularly monitor that impact over time. So if we're seeing something like 200 in the UK and 10 and was that Nigeria or Africa? Africa. That's like, those are the monitoring thing that we just keep that loop going, and we have to continue to push resources in those gaps so that we can see that, because Africa only having 10 innovative giants actually hurts the whole world, not just Africa. It hurts the whole world to only have 10 here. So because the people who are experiencing the problems, and we know this, are going to be the most innovative in solving them. And so that is why it's going to be so important that we drive resources where they are required to develop this innovation, because the world needs them to solve these problems. I'll stop
Thanks.
there.
Uche, I want you to dive in. There's a reason why. You know it. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, so great points. I think for me, it's three things that I'll point out, right? One is, you have to increase the supply of innovation, and you have to increase the supply of African innovation. So
How though?
okay, so one thing we do at the foundation is, maybe if you guys haven't heard about it, but every year we have an event called Grand Challenges, right? Where we actually set out a call, we put a problem that we want to solve, and biased a little bit because again, we have these issues around health and economic opportunity. But we'll put out a problem and say, and we ask innovators to come in and submit proposals on how they're going to solve this problem. And a lot of them are African innovators. I think the last one we did was in Senegal. And we actually, for the first time, we had, a robust set of responses to grand challenges that skewed, more than 50% African innovators putting this together, right? So now, the idea is that those ideas come, and the ones that actually strong and have the best ratings actually get dedicated patient seed funding for them to actually build this out, right? So that actually helps the innovators in the 10 things they have to do, maybe to worry about 2 or 3 or less of those, right? At least have some certainty that some funding is there. But I think, that we need more platforms like that actually very intentionally create what that is. The second is, you need some rails, right, that make the work of innovators easier. So I think somebody touched on digital public infrastructure, right? Or maybe that was yesterday. So we at the foundation, we actually want to invest in things like that. So it's not necessarily this point solutions itself, but things that we know in other countries that have accelerated, use digital to accelerate the innovations they've invested in. It's things like ID. Does everybody have a common ID that they can use, right? It's things like interoperable payment systems, right? So can people send money between each other in a way that is seamless? Then it's this idea of data exchange. So those are the 3 pillars. There's a lot of data out there. Is there an easy way to be able to exchange it? Because when you invest in these things, it brings down the cost of people trying to innovate with digital, right? So we spend some of our philanthropic dollars investing in these things. Then the third piece, which I think people ignore sometimes, but it does play a real big role, is the role of government and the role of enabling policies to create that conducive environment, right? So yes, innovation is largely private sector driven, but government does have a role to make sure that there are the right policies in place to make sure that those innovators can actually thrive. So we spend a big chunk of our dollars as well, not our dollars, mostly our voice, to be able to advocate for the right type of policies that make sense. And we do it by looking at exemplars, countries that have been able to innovate their way out of poverty, right, through technology. What are the stack of things that they did? There's a lot of this is not hidden. There are very clear things. You do 1, 2, 3, 4, then it actually provides you the thing. So we bring those and we actually put them in front of policymakers and say, please do 1, 2, 3, 4 if you can, right? Not always successful, but we try. So I think to me, those are the 3 things that I'll call.
I was going to ask, and you answered, how hard or easy is that to do so? But I think that I want, Juliet, I want you to respond to this, partly because is that enough? Are we missing some other pieces there? I know we won't touch on this in this section, but around AI and increasing the contribution, Latanya, you've mentioned this, increasing the contribution of African innovators, not just to receive innovation and ideas, but to actually contribute to the world in terms of the ideas. We've heard Africa Rising, we've heard Africa to the world, Afro music, Afro culture to the world. What about Afro tech to the world? What could that look like, and what are we missing there? Also, I also throw in a second question as you want to take it. We're hearing that we've got a fantastic panel. We're missing a conversation with DFIs, policymakers, as Uche said, who may be in the room here today and maybe online and listening to this. What's that charge there? What's their role? How can we increase the throughput or the efficiency of that to meet this multi-sector approach to supporting innovation that we really need now?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned AI. I think that's actually a very good example of an opportunity for us to lean in and be part of shaping the direction of technology growth and shaping the future. Because, if we look at generative AI, there's been a lot of excitement around generative AI because of the use cases. And those platforms are very powerful. But the reality is, a lot of what you get is a function of what the system has been trained with. And in a lot of cases, the algorithms have not been based on a lot of African-sourced data sets. There are times I perform some searches, and the results I get back, it's very clear that if I was sitting in London, this would be right on point. But me sitting in Lagos, this response I'm getting back, it's a bit generic. It lacks local context and flavor, right? And we need to lean into actually being part of the conversations, being part of the operations, being part of shaping these technologies. And I mentioned earlier that we've had experiences where we've leaned into technology and we've been able to leapfrog. I think AI provides another opportunity where we can be really active in leveraging those technologies to escalate to accelerate the rate at which we can solve local problems, but also where we can look at knowledge transfer from Africa to the rest of the world. Because we have a lot of, if we talk about data sets, for example, we have a lot of amazing data in Africa. If I just take agriculture, the IITA in Ibadan, Institute for Tropical Agricultural Research, research around, soil types and formations, crops, it's about genetic engineering and a lot of things, right? But even locally, our agri-tech startups, do they have access to that data, right? And then think about globally. So there's a lot of work to be done. First, to actually, I'll say three things. One is to be deliberate and proactive in creating collaborative engagements with technology leaders in AI in Silicon Valley, in Asia, in Europe, collaboratively looking at where the gaps exist in those data sets, and then doing the hard work of digitizing the data or making it available. And this is an area that, government can also help facilitate. But I think whilst we were playing catch up in previous industrial revolutions, in the current space with AI and these emerging technologies, we shouldn't really be playing catch up. I think we have everything. We have the awareness, the knowledge, the skill set, the time. We have everything to really be able to lean into and be a credible voice shaping the direction of these technologies.
Thank you.
And
Go ahead, Latanya.
add, Dr. Janet, to that, I would add academia. So I teach at Columbia University. I've been a professor there for 10 years. I watch how in New York, they really kind of channel their students' ideas, and they find, because it can be hard for an innovator to, in whatever sector, to kind of find where the matching resources or matching support is. And I find that academia is one of these places where young professionals can get the kind of support they need to look out. And even if they're not sort of in the university setting, the university itself does outreach in its own communities and its own countries to be able to find those innovators who they can now channel their ideas into R&D projects. And what I do know that something that we have to do in Africa is support the academic sector. The higher education R&D needs government resources. It needs, even if we're talking about DFI, to channel those resources into those settings because they have the closest relationship with many of these innovators of our day. And so I would add that piece because I think it's going to be crucial for us if we're actually identifying gaps and if we're using the data that we find to now innovate to be in these markets, that academia has to be a close partner in that. And that means that these schools have to be resourced at the level that's required to be able to support these sectors. So I just wanted to add that because I think that's
No,
absolutely
I
right.
think that's a very good add.
Yeah.
Juliet?
Can I add something very quickly as well?
Yeah.
Also, when we talk about ethical AI, because this is another very hot topic, right? In our cultures in Africa, we have ingrained values, right, that can really be shared and play a very critical role in shaping how we think about our humanity in the face of artificial intelligence, the power of these technologies, the implications, etc. So this, and we should put that on the table. So this is another opportunity where the knowledge transfer, where we can really contribute value, right, to the direction that the world is fast moving to.
I love this idea of we're capacitating the world. I think it's about time we had those types of conversations. So we thank NESG for allowing this kind of conversation to have. It's not even a bold idea, it's practical.
Yeah.
As you said, if we get more unicorns from Africa, think about the unicorns we have and how much impact that was to billions of people, right? So, and it's not an Africa issue, it's a Africa to the world, and the world receiving the African technology, insights, ethical, moral, values, all of that. And we need to make sure that that's also in the digital space. We don't have too much time, so I want to give each of you, I don't want to do a closing, but I would like to close with you all with about 30 seconds or 40 seconds of maybe taking this question: what are the next steps we need to have? What's the boots on the ground tomorrow that we would need to have in these types of collaborations, or that can be more impactful? If I can start Uche, and then I'll work my way through Juliet and then to Latanya.
Yeah. So I think for me, it will be pay attention to the barriers that are there and be focused on trying to help solve them, because especially for Nigeria is a place where you don't need to teach innovation. It's in the DNA of every Nigerian. What they face are barriers for them to be able to do it. So pay attention to those things. And I think that's what we talked about here. Financing, the digital infrastructure for those things to be able to drive. And even in things like AI, right? Juliet was 100% correct. Like we are still nascent. The market is nascent here. And there are certain things that are actually structured for us, we're able to get, like large language models. Like, so next time you Google something or do something, actually, next time you use generative AI and you want to say something in pidgin or something, does it understand? Right? Things like that. Right. So I think, so really thinking about carefully those things, listening to the innovators, and actually, rallying, using our ecosystem convening power to rally around people who can actually unblock those things for them. Over.
Collaboration in service of the innovators, and listen to innovators and what they need. Juliet?
I agree totally. I think we need to be intentional to look at removing the roadblocks where the lowest hanging fruits are. I talked about the digital economy, and just really identifying those levers that are going to make the most difference, where we can see, yesterday there was a conversation around the fact that it'll take 15 years if we're consistent to turn things around. I think if we're intentional, we can probably do that in a shorter time. If you think about the business processing outsourcing industry that we're not even playing at, we have all it takes. We have English language, we have the skills, etc. Right? So if we just, if we're focused and look at where's the low hanging fruit and be intentional in driving growth in those areas, it would require public-private partnerships. to just really help to create that enabling environment for those things to thrive.
Significant intentionality and strategic investments in the ways that can unlock. Thank you so much, Juliet. Latanya, if you can round us out.
Sure, yeah, and totally agree with both
Everyone
my colleagues here.
agrees.
I know, it's amazing. And that leads me to what I think in my last seconds that I can just offer is this, I put up this as display the road to bold. I think we have to boldly be able to establish what it is that's required. So the things that we're talking about up here, the things that were spoken about yesterday, we can't just do that in a conference setting. We have to go boldly to identify the areas, as was stated, that we're going to focus on in Nigeria, in Africa, and in the world, and actually go and tell the world how we're going to do that so that we can put our stamp on these things early. Because often what I'm thinking is some of the ideas are actually coming from these areas of the world, but then they're being developed in other parts, the Silicon Valleys and other parts of the world where there are resources to do that. And so my intention here is to say that we need to talk boldly about our ideas, but we also need to make sure that they're not captured and taken and developed in other places. And that boldness, I think, will allow us to have partnerships and collaborations, as we talked about, that will then enhance those things for us. Not that we make them here, come up with them here, they go get developed somewhere else, and then we got to buy them back. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a different time. So if it's our ideas in Africa, if it's our innovation, then even those resources need to come back here to be able to develop them so that we can use them for the benefit of the people of Africa, the people of other parts of the world that need them. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, on that note, right? Yes, you can clap. But also stop clapping because the work starts now. So no, it really does. And so I want to thank the panel for laying out the agenda, the need, the urgency, the math, and making sure that we can fill those gaps. So thank you very much. Uche, Juliet, Latanya, thank you so much. And thank you, NESG, for having this really powerful conversation. Thank you.
Again. No, please don't go yet. Apologies. You need to take a picture, especially with a chairman. Très bien. So please let's celebrate our moderator, Eniola Mafe. She's done a beautiful job. Let's also celebrate our speaker, Latanya Map, Juliet Ehuman, and Uchi Amanwo. Please let's give them a resounding round of applause for a job well done as they spoke on shaping Africa's innovation frontiers, entrepreneurship, ecosystem, and governance. Thank you, Dr. Juliet, for being here today. OK. Avancer. Il faut avancer. C'est bon comme ça? D'accord. 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 Thank you very much. My colleagues take it over. Ladies first, right?
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We will proceed for tea break and networking right now. We have about 20 minutes for that. Tea break is happening. We have Oshun and Plateau rooms. We have the Bauchi and Sokoto rooms. You can please speak to any of our hostesses if you need help locating any of the rooms. But we have just 20 minutes for light tea, light coffee, light tea and snacks so that we can return to the room. We have 6 high-level panel conversations that will happen afterwards. We have 6 of them. All our moderators are ready and they're excited for the conversations that is to come. 6 high-level panel conversations will happen concurrently once we return from tea break. By my time, it is 10:17. Please let's return to the room by 10:40. 10:40 prompt, we will announce where the different high-level panel conversations will be. We don't want you to miss any of these conversations if you're interested. Please enjoy your networking time. Tea break will happen Oshun, Plateau, Bauchi, Sokoto Room. We also have a lovely art area. So the exhibition is at the lobby. We want you to visit the art exhibition. We introduced that to the conference this year, of course, to do something differently. So please stop by and see the lovely masterpieces that we have there. We have an art exhibition area. So whilst you're networking, you can take your conversations to the art exhibition area. We will see you at exactly 10:40 a.m. And that gives us 22 minutes for networking, to visit the art exhibition area, and of course to have tea, coffee, take pictures, network, and make some new connections, as that is also a part of what is to come from this conference. We'll see you by 10:40 a.m.
Is virtual app. With this app, you can enjoy all the goodness on offer at the Nigerian Economic Summit. Get your username and password from your email to log in. On the home front,